Ready, Mr. Foley? Justin, honey, you were my very first kiss, my very first hand to hold, but you were nothing more than an average guy. And I don't say that to be mean, I don't. There was just something about you that made me need to be your girlfriend. To this day I don't know exactly what that was, but it was there, and it was amazingly strong. You don't know this, but 2 years ago, when I was a freshman and you were a sophomore, I used to follow you around. For 6th period, I worked in the attendance office, so I knew every one of your classes. I even photocopied your schedule, which I'm sure I still have somewhere. And when they go through my belongings, they'll probably toss it away thinking a freshman crush has no relevance. But does it? For me, yes it does. I went back as far as to you to find an introduction to my story, and this is really where it begins. When you reach the end of these tapes, Justin, I hope you'll understand your role in all of this, because it may seem like a small role now, but it matters. In the end, everything matters. Betrayal. It's one of the worst feelings. I know you didn't mean to let me down. In fact, most of you listening probably had no idea what you were doing, what you were truly doing. Our first red star can be found at C4. Take your finger over to C and drop it down to 4. That's right, just like Battleship. When you're done with this tape, go there. We only lived in that house for a short while, the summer before my freshman year, but it's where we lived when we first came to town. It's where I lived when I first saw you, Justin. Maybe you'll remember. You were in love with my friend Kat. School was still 2 months away, and Kat was the only person I knew, because she lived right next door. She told me you were all over her the previous year. Not literally all over her, just staring at her and accidentally bumping into her in the halls. I mean, those were accidents, right? Kat told me that at the end of school dance, you finally found the nerve to do more than stare and bump into her. You two danced every slow song together, and soon, she told me, she was going to let you kiss her. The very first kiss of her life. What an honor! I wanted to see what you looked like, Justin, so we called you from my house and told you to come over. We called you from my house because Kat didn't want you to know where she lived. Well, not yet. Even though her house was right next door. You were playing ball. I don't know if it was basketball, baseball, or what, but you couldn't come over until later, so we waited. We sat in the front bay window, talking for hours, when all of a sudden you and one of your friends, hi Zach, came walking up the street. 2 streets meet in front of my old house, like an upside-down T, so you were walking up the middle of the road towards us. You stepped out of the gutter and placed 1 foot on the lawn. My dad had the sprinklers running all morning, so the grass was wet, and your foot slid forward, sending you into a split. Zach had been staring out the window, trying to get a better view of Kat's new friend, yours truly, and he tripped over you, landing beside you on the curb. You pushed him off and stood up. Then he stood up, and you both looked at each other, not sure what to do. And your decision? You ran back down the street while Kat and I laughed like crazy. Kat moved away before the start of school, and I fell in love with the boy she left behind. And it wasn't long until that boy started showing an interest in me, which might have nothing to do with the fact that I seemed to be always around. We didn't share any classes, but our classrooms for periods 1, 4, and 5 were at least close to each other. Okay, so period 5 was a stretch, and sometimes I wouldn't get there until after you'd left. But periods 1 and 4 were at least in the same hall. After a while, I managed to say hello, and a little while later you managed to say it back. Then one day, I walked by without saying a word. I knew you couldn't handle that, and it led to our very first multi-word conversation. "Hey," you said, "aren't you going to say hello?" I smiled and took a breath and turned around. Why should I? Because you always say hello. I asked why you thought you were such an expert on me. I said you probably didn't know anything about me. Earlier, when I asked my mom how to get a boy's attention, she said, play hard to get. So that's what I was doing, and sure enough it worked. You started hanging around my classes waiting for me. It seemed like weeks went by before you finally asked for my number, but I knew you eventually would, so I practiced saying it out loud. Real calm and confident, like I didn't really care. Like I gave it out 100 times a day. Yes, boys at my school asked for my number, but here at my new school, you were the first. No, that's not true, but you were the first to actually get my number. It's not that I didn't want to give it out before, I was just cautious. New town, new school, and this time I was going to be in control about how people saw me. After all, how often do we get a second chance? Before you, Justin, whenever anyone asked, I'd say all the right numbers up until the very last one, and then I'd get scared and mess up. Sort of accidentally on purpose. I was getting way too excited watching you write down my number. Luckily, you were way too nervous to notice. When I finally spat out that last number, the correct number, I smiled really big. Meanwhile, your hand was shaking so badly that I thought you were going to screw it up, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I pointed to the number you were writing. That should be a 7, I said. It is a 7. Oh well, as long as you know it's a 7. I do, you said, but you scratched it out and made an even shakier 7. I stretched out the cuff of my sleeve into my palm and almost reached over to wipe the sweat from your forehead. Something my mother would have done, but thankfully I didn't do that. You would have never asked for another girl's number again. By the time I got home, you already called. Twice. My mom asked who you were, and I said we had a class together. You were probably just calling with a homework question. And she says that's exactly what you had told her. I couldn't believe it, Justin. You lied to my mom? So why did that make me so happy? Because our lives match. It was a sign. My mom asked what class I had, and I said math, which wasn't a total lie. We both had math, just not together and not the same type. Good, Mom said. That's what he told me. I accused her of not trusting her own daughter, grabbed a slip of paper with your number from her hand, and ran upstairs. When you answered the phone, I said, Justin, it's Hannah. My mom said you called with a math problem. You were confused, but eventually you remembered lying to my mom, and like a good boy, you apologized. So, Justin, what's the math problem? I asked. You weren't getting off that easy. And you didn't miss a beat. You told me train A was leaving your house at 3:45 p.m., train B was leaving my house 10 minutes later. You couldn't see this, Justin, but I actually raised my hand like I was in school, rather than sitting on the edge of my bed. Pick me, Mr. Foley, pick me, I said. I know the answer. When you called my name, yes, Miss Baker, I threw Mom's hard-to-get roll right out the window. I told you the 2 trains would meet at Eisenhower Park at the bottom of the rocket slide. A long pause at your end, Justin, and I mean a long pause. So, when did the trains meet? You finally asked. 15 minutes, I said. You said 15 minutes seemed awfully slow for 2 trains going full speed. I know what you're all thinking. Hannah Baker is a slut.